Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of our podcast, Web3 and Chill. I'm Aayush, joined with my co host Vishal, who's wearing a similar color. And today we have with us Cortney, who is founder and CEO of Friendship with Holograms, an author, a faculty, and a great speaker as well. So, Courtney, welcome to our podcast. Really glad to have you here. Uh, my first question: what makes you do so many things in life?
Oh God, I've always been like this. I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but I've always just been the type of person who always needs a lot going on. I get bored very easily. I'm a very curious person. I'm always kind of like wanting to learn more, wanting to do more stuff, wanting to test myself. So yeah, believe me, there are times I wish I could just like work a 9 to 5 and go home and chill out. But for some reason that's just not in the cards for my personality. So I tend to work and work and work. And I have tried to be better about it, not committing myself to so many things. But there's so much exciting stuff. It's really hard to turn
Mhm.
some of it down.
That's great. Very
That's
well.
very inspiring. So, how did you start your journey into the world of metaverse and immersive? And we also want to know what is the story behind Friends with Hologram.
Yeah, so I started in 2015, actually, so a long time ago. So I have a background as a journalist. I was a music journalist. I was a reporter and editor at a magazine called Billboard, covering the music business and music technology. And then I was there for a long while. And then I got into sort of the music technology space. So I was working with different music tech startups. And then I did that for several years. I wrote a couple of books about it. I had a podcast. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot, but I was a little less inspired than I had been at the start. So in 2015, I very randomly went to go see this musician I liked, and she had a VR component to her live show. And I just remember getting in headset, and this was very, very early. This might have been like the developer kit still. And so I got in the headset, I did the experience, and something was really amazing about it. Like to this day, I can't really explain what it was, but it really imprinted and stuck with me. And so I spent 2015, because I was still on contract with this other music tech startup. I was writing, I was learning, I was really trying to understand like, what is this technology?
Mm.
2016, I went to South by Southwest. I was on a panel about music and virtual reality with a director named Kevin. He was just about to start a production company. We hit it off. We started working together. I came on to lead like business development strategy for him. I was there for about a year and a half. And at that point, I just was kind of ready to try something on my own. I felt like I'd learned a ton from him and still, I'm inspired by the work that he does. So that's when I started Friends with Holograms. And we've been around since like early 2018. I'd say we sort of became official. I was building out the idea before that, but sort of the paperwork was filed at the end of 2017, top of 2018. And so, yeah, we've been around for a while. We've worked with a lot of amazing clients. We've done a lot of really interesting projects. We cover VR, AR, and the metaverse. We've worked on projects for all three. And we really focus on social impact. So we want to make sure that the work we're doing makes sort of the world a better place. So a lot of the work we do is really focused around that. But again, we work on a lot of different types of projects.
Got it, got it. That's really inspiring and exciting. You are also a faculty who educate people on AR and VR. And today I see AR, VR, or even Unity and Web AR development is a huge talent, and there is a lot of demand, and there is not a lot of people who know. So how do you guide people on how to get started? Someone who do not have a technical background, how do they get started to get into this field, get trained, and be industry ready to take or build great experiences?
So I don't have a technical background at all. I know a little bit of Unity, like basic intro level Unity, and that's largely so I can talk to developers and sound like I know what I'm talking about. I can understand, what is possible and what is not possible, right? What takes a month versus what takes a week. But that's it. Like I can't build anything in Unity. If you ask me to do that, I couldn't. What I can do is hire people who know how to do that, which is great. So I really focus on kind of the creative, the strategy, and the bigger picture of how
Mm.
this technology can and should be used.
Got
So,
it.
I'm teaching a seminar actually right after this podcast for an organization called Fast Future Executive, which is an executive education platform. It's amazing. Definitely check them out. I teach tonight at Barnard College in New York. I'm teaching a seminar there on building a diverse and inclusive metaverse. I've taught at NYU, I've taught at Caltech, I've taught at North Carolina State University, I've lectured at like Columbia, Harvard, all sorts of different places. So, you know, I think that people just kind of need to learn how to think about this stuff because it is very new. But there's a lot of things that transition from sort of the media we have now into the metaverse and what that'll look like in the future. So when I think about the metaverse in particular, the sort of virtual worlds, you don't have to be technical. There are lots and lots of platforms that exist out there where you can just open up a new world. Maybe you drag and drop some photos, like very simple stuff. But it's really about building community because I have seen on a number of occasions technically proficient and beautiful metaverse worlds with no one in them because you have no reason to actually be part of it. So I think for me, it's really about when we think about this stuff, we think about interaction, design, how do we build these worlds? How do we create stories? And then the technical stuff, like if that's something people are interested in, they absolutely, absolutely should learn it and pursue it. I'm 100% in favor of that. But I don't want people to get the idea that you have to be technical to work in the space because you really don't.
Got it, got it. No, that's amazing, and that's very clear. You're also a part of the Metaverse Council in World Economic Forum. How governments today are approaching on regulation in this area because it's not yet out there, and there might be a lot of gray area around privacy, making the place a safe and inclusive space. So, what are your point of view on how uh, people are creating regulation on this?
Yeah, it's still very early stages. So I'm on two World Economic Forum Metaverse Councils. One is on sort of arts and entertainment, and then one is on governance. And the governance council is really fascinating. They put out a white paper at Davos, so a month and a half ago now, when I was there, which was fascinating. And I think the challenge that we are going to have as we think about how to regulate this metaverse and this new world is most policymakers don't really know anything about it. Like in the United States, which is where I'm based, if you watch some of these hearings for even just social media or internet regulations, they're kind of comic, right? Like these legislators are just
Zuckerberg, I think, from a couple of years back, where
yeah,
that was hilarious. I think
yeah. They don't know anything. They don't know anything about even like social media. So the metaverse is like a bridge way too far for many of these folks. So I think, you know, on one hand, we want it to be regulated to be a safe place. On the other hand, we don't want it to be regulated so that it's like onerous and people don't enjoy using it. I think the biggest challenge is like moderation in the metaverse is pretty impossible at this point. Like it has to be a self-moderated community because there's no other way to do it, right? It's all real time. It's all interactions between people, between avatars. So, you know, if somebody posts something really offensive on a platform like Twitter, well, before Elon Musk took it over, right? If somebody pre-Elon, somebody posted something offensive on Twitter, you could see it, you could report it, there would be a system in place. Now, whether that system works well or not is very much up for debate, but there was like a system in place and it was something that was permanent that somebody could report. In the metaverse, right, that gets a lot harder unless you're kind of recording everyone all the time, and that gets into a lot of like privacy issues and consent and honestly bandwidth. You can't record every interaction in the metaverse when it gets to scale because like it's just impossible. So I think with the metaverse moving forward, we really need to make sure it's people can moderate each other, people can moderate themselves, and it has to be very sort of like community focused, and we need strong community guidelines in different worlds in order to do that. So it can't just be this sort of terms of service that you click when you sign up. We need to be very clear about that, and we need to give people the opportunity to moderate each other and make sure that that then doesn't cross over into sort of this like secret police, everyone's ratting each other out type of thing, because that's not the world we want. We want a space for free and open exchange of ideas, but there's a difference between that and people using hate speech or violence. So it's tricky. I don't have all the answers. I don't think anyone does at this point, but you know, definitely moving forward, we need to make sure that we have really good guidelines in place from day one to make sure that what happened in Web 2, some of the mistakes don't happen in Web 3.
Yeah, maybe there will be AI cops
Yeah.
moving around the metaverse.
No, so there's a YouTube live going on. Apart from the host, there are a bunch of moderators from the same community, and they do keep a check on, hey, who's typing what? Is there somebody who's going against the guidelines? And they take actions. So I think there has to be way more community-driven moderators or some mechanism like that, to take care of such scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Reddit weirdly tends to do kind of a good job at this. Like Reddit often doesn't get as much maybe attention as some of the other platforms, but from my experience with Reddit, and it's obviously not a universal experience. I think there's a lot of bad stuff that happens there, but what I tend to see more often on Reddit than on other platforms is people that are sort of in charge of the communities or people that are part of the communities kind of moderate each other, which is great.
Yeah. So Courtney, taking a step back, why should a company look at being in the AR, VR, or the metaverse space? What goals should they think of achieving from this space? And because right now, as I understand, there's a very niche audience which exists, or there's a very less number of people who own a VR headset. So what's the ROI, or what's the purpose of these companies getting into the space?
Yeah, so there's a lot in that question that I want to unpack, because VR, AR, and the metaverse are linked, but they are not the same, right? So VR, and this is so funny because this is exactly the class that I'm teaching in like an hour. So I've got the spiel in my head, so now I'm gonna go ahead with it. So VR is the in-headset experience. It's very immersive. The AR is the more sort of interacting with the real world experience. So that's generally at this point on your smartphone, on your tablet. It's the Pokemon Go. It's that type of really interesting connecting the real world with your digital screen experience. The metaverse is this broader concept that is really about using avatars and voice to communicate rather than text or video. So, when people talk about, oh, the metaverse is over, Roblox is up 25% in the last year. Roblox is doing the best of almost any tech company. And Roblox is the metaverse, right? It's avatars embodied by voice. It's a very young audience, and it's doing incredibly well. So it's sort of silly to say like the metaverse is over when in fact it's growing exponentially. Now, some metaverse worlds are doing better than others. That's to be expected. In every sort of space, there's going to be winners and losers, and companies that are more niche and companies that are more mainstream. That's fine. Like right now, everyone's just building. So I think when we look at what companies should be doing, there are a couple options. So if you are a company that does any sort of employee training, employee learning, which most companies do that are larger than a handful of people, you should be focusing on VR and AR. You can also focus on metaverse for workplace applications. But I think the real win for these companies is training, education, and learning. So what these companies should be focusing on is how do we build, this is going to turn into a commercial for Friends with Holograms, but how do we build really impactful learning simulations? And what we've seen, and there's reams and reams of data about this at this point, is we see great results, huge results, 70% performance improvement, 40% faster training. Students who learn in the metaverse get higher grades than students who don't. Okay. So yeah, there's a lot of great reasons why you should be using this technology. Okay. On the metaverse side of things, you can use the metaverse for workplace. There's platforms like Glue, Horizon Workrooms, Spatial that you can use for meetings, you can use for collaboration sessions. And then you have sort of the social stuff. And so that's where a lot of companies are trying. And I hate to say it, but a lot of them are really not hitting the mark. So I'll give you a couple examples of things that have worked well and maybe some that don't, and I won't use their names because, again, I believe that people should experiment and try things. So two of the examples, and these are often used examples, Nike's Roblox world is fantastic because they resource it correctly. So they have built a strong community because they have people working on it. People want to come be part of this world. They want to look at the new product launches. They want to interact with other people in the community. They have guests. So Nike does a really good job at the Roblox world, best in class. The other world that I think is great is BRC VR, which is Black Rock City VR, which is the virtual Burning Man that was built during COVID, during 2020. What they did that was incredible was they took all the good things about Burning Man, the art, the camps, the sort of all the weird stuff, the costumes. They kept all the good stuff. They got rid of all the bad stuff, right? You don't have to pay $1 zillion for a ticket. Tickets don't sell out. It doesn't smell like, several thousand people haven't showered for a week and there's no flushable toilets, right? There's no dust storms randomly coming out of nowhere. So they took everything that was good. They got rid of everything that was bad. And then they added the metaverse magic, which is like, you can fly around the playa. How cool is that? No one could do that before unless you were like some tech exec in a private jet, so they really did a great job, and they built community, and people would come back again and again and again to explore and be part of it. So that's, examples of what to do. Here's what not to do. And I talked about this a little bit earlier. So a restaurant in the US, a restaurant chain, built a metaverse world, and it looked great. And they did a big press release, and oh, how cutting edge they are, how exciting they are, right? Now I went in there the first day, and it was busy, and it was exciting and fun, and people were playing games, and I was like, this is neat. Then 3 days later, I went back, and there were 2 other people in there. And I went back.
McDonald's?
Sorry?
Are we talking about McDonald's?
It wasn't McDonald's. I'm not going to say who it was, because I don't want to like pick on people for experimenting, but it wasn't McDonald's. It was a different one in the US. So I go back in there, and it's empty, like dead. And I was like, wow, they spent all this time and energy and effort, and they just let it go. And I think, brands like built it and they don't know what to do with it. And I also think brands are too literal when it comes to the metaverse. And here's what I mean by that. Like a clothing brand. So H&M is a clothing brand. And they said, we're building a store in the metaverse. You can shop in the metaverse, but it's literally just a virtual version of a physical store. So like, why? What's the point? Again, this is technology where you can fly. You can do all these amazing things. And you're just building a digital version of a store? Like, okay, that's not bad. It's not actively harmful, but it just kind of shows a failure of imagination. And so I really think, again, when the internet first started, like websites were just sort of like PDFs about companies. No one really thought about like design or interactivity, right? Because people didn't know that was a thing. When social media first started, brands got into social media and they would be like, we're having a sale tomorrow. Use code such and such for 50% off. Like, it was boring. And it was only after a couple of years that brands started to develop really unique voices. And now you see brands on social media, like the Denny's Tumblr, which is an old example, but a great example, because they took this brand that was very sort of stuffy and kind of lame, to be perfectly honest, and they made it snarky and funny. And they got this whole new generation into this pretty bad restaurant, to be totally honest. Or like what Oreos did during the Super Bowl in the US in 2013, where there was a blackout. Oreos like seized on that moment. And so now you have brands that are starting to develop personalities, do stuff with social media they couldn't have done before. And I think where we're at in the metaverse is we're at that point where brands haven't quite figured out what is their voice in the metaverse, what is their community in the metaverse. So, these are things that will get worked out and will get built. But I think, if you're a brand, you really need to think about that as sort of your starting point. Like, what are you trying to accomplish in the metaverse? And if what you're trying to accomplish is, well, our competitors did it, or our boss read about it in Wired and thought it was neat, like, that's not a good reason, right? You need a reason. You need a reason for being.
I think when it comes down to fashion brands, Gucci did a good thing with its Gucci Garden with Roblox.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, that was cool. That was cool. I mean, yeah, like more brands are experimenting, more brands are doing cool stuff. But again, it's still pretty early days.
But I again still echo to your point that a lot of brands are just doing it for the sake of doing, just they are opening a virtual store which is soon going to be dead because people don't see any added advantage. And again, I fully agree, there is a lack of imagination. That is why we need more people like you who are actually helping people to imagine that and create a great experience. Apart from this, I think you have also done a lot of work in the social space on VR training. Would you like to talk about that and how it is also driving a great impact?
Yeah, so that's really what we've been doing for the last several years. The metaverse stuff is a little bit newer because that space is a little newer. So our really, I would say 70% of our projects are metaverse training for social impact. So we've built stuff for child welfare workers on how to talk to families in crisis. That was our first really big project that we did. We built a piece on racial bias for a big store chain on how it feels to be on the receiving end of a bias incident and then how to handle it. We built a piece on mental health, so how to have conversations about not serious mental health topics, but if you notice your coworker is kind of anxious or kind of feeling down, how do you have a conversation with them that is productive? We're working right now on a piece about workplace exclusion and we actually just filmed it on Saturday. So how does it feel to be on the receiving end when you are excluded sort of systematically by your coworkers? So, the way we approach this is we meet people where they are, right? So we don't say, put on the headset and pretend you're this or that. That doesn't work, right? You can't undo however many years you've been alive of being a type of person in your type of body by just putting on a headset. That's foolish. So what we do is we say, okay, you're just yourself, right? We give very broad parameters. So for some of the workplace stuff, we say, okay, you're an employee at a company, right? That's the audience who's going to go through this. Yeah. But other than that, you do it as yourself. And how that really works is you feel what it's like to be on the receiving end of some of these things that a lot of people luckily haven't experienced in their lives. So, we built another VR inclusion piece a couple of years ago, and we tested it. This was very early on. I think this was before we even released it. We were still user testing. We tested with this guy, and he does the experience, and he takes off the headset, and he says, that wasn't a conversation. That was an emotional experience. And I was like, oh, cool, let's go on our website. And then he was like, I never felt that way before. I didn't understand what that felt like. And it was really impactful and powerful for him. And he actually went back and changed a lot of things at his workplace to make it better and fairer and more equitable. So that's where we get really excited, is these sort of breakthrough things that you can only do in this technology.
Courtney, earlier you mentioned that it's not necessary to be just technical in the field of metaverse. As you're a non-tech person, what are the non-tech skills that somebody can learn, where they can learn this from, and how can they find a job or a space for themselves to apply their skills at?
Okay, so non-tech skills, every VR company needs the same things that every company needs, right? So if you're a person who does project management or public relations or accounting, right? VR companies all need that stuff too, so you can get into the space that way. If you are somebody who's great at writing scripts, people need that. If you're a great creative director, you need that. If you're a great strategist, VR companies need that. So I would say, people ask me all the time, how do you get into this? And I say, well, what do you do now? And how is that still transferable, right? Because again, this is a pretty early stage where we're at, but obviously we need people to be building. So that's kind of that. There's a lot of places people can fit in. Now, learning how to do it, people today are really lucky because I had to learn through trial and error. I just made stuff. I built stuff. I guessed, right? I just made it up until I figured it out. And I had a 360 camera where I just shot test footage until I knew how to do it. And now there are programs, ranging from kind of bigger programs, like New York University has a really good program about VR and AR and design. There are classes online. So I co-taught a class called What is the Metaverse? It's a Coursera class sponsored by Meta. I co-wrote many of the scripts and I taught 4 of the units. That's fantastic. And that's free. I think you can pay to get a certificate, but it's free to watch the videos. But I would say really the thing to do if you want to be more on the creative side of things is to just start doing stuff, right? Get a 360 camera and just start shooting stuff and you'll figure it out. Figure out a point of view, figure out a story, right? If you want to build something in a game engine, that's a little harder if you're not technical, obviously, but you can find somebody who is technical and figure out a way to work with them. Go to networking events. There's lots and lots of events. There were tons of events before COVID, fewer after COVID. I think some of them just kind of went away. But most cities have meetups or conferences. There's a lot of events about this stuff. People tend to be very open and friendly in this space, right? You can find them on LinkedIn, find them on Twitter, find them on whatever your social platform of choice is, and just kind of start learning. We're at a really good place because, the barrier to entry is pretty low. A 360 camera, a decent one costs, a couple $100. That's not nothing, but that's not a ton, right? A headset costs a couple $100, a good Quest 2, you can buy one used. It's not nothing, but that's not a ton. And then you can kind of figure it out from there. And, that's the best way to learn is just by building and making tons of mistakes because you'll eventually figure it out.
So the tagline here by Cortney is just do it. And Nike, if you're listening, pay us.
Don't sue me. Don't sue me, Nike. I'm sorry. Nike gave my parents free shoes because I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and my parents were distance runners. And it trickled down to me because I am as well. But my parents, for years, Nike would send them stuff because they were part of the Portland running circuit. So fan of Nikes, please don't sue me. But feel free to send me shoes. I'll take them.
Oh, no, we are promoting them anyway, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you are also an award-winning person in the space of AR and VR. So what do you think? What makes that unique things that separate from great AR and VR experience from anything that we see today? Because today, not VR, but today we see a lot of AR. Thanks to Snapchat, Instagram, everyone is creating a filter. So what do you think? What makes that an experience more impactful or differentiator from everything else that is available today?
Yeah, so the stuff we won the most awards for is the child welfare piece that we built. And that was just like kind of a lot of the technology we used at the time was very new with like voice recognition, branching narratives, and it was a very like intense emotional piece. So I think that that was the reason that was, recognized a lot. Another piece that we won some awards for was this piece about workplace inclusion that we did a few years ago, which again was just like kind of different. It was kind of what people hadn't seen before. So I think for us, it's the quality of the work, right? We don't use avatars for stuff like that. We use real people, we use actors. It's shot in 360 video, it's very high quality, and it's very cinematic, and it really gets you to feel something. So I think that's why we were fortunate enough to be recognized for that. I think with the AR stuff, like there's really cool stuff you can do even with filters, right? I'm constantly sort of playing with Instagram, playing with Snapchat, playing with other platforms. Like TikTok has filters now, but they're very strange. It like creep me out for some reason. But yeah, there's really interesting filters to be made, and I'll show you. So this is, I can't really show the full experience of this on camera just because of the way it's set up, but I'll show you this. Oh, this is gonna look blurry and terrible. Okay, so this is looks terrible, looks at my filter. All right, so I'll just explain this because it looks bad. So there's a university in Mexico City called Centro. It's like a well-known art school. It's like if you're in the US, it's like Pratt or RISD. It's like if you're in London, it's like St. Martin's it's that type of school, right? So they have worked augmented and virtual reality into every single part of their curriculum, which is amazing. They are one of the coolest, most cutting edge schools. I was really, really honored to give the commencement address there last year. Like it was incredible. And so this blurry bag that, sorry about that not showing up, I have my background filter on. This actually is an augmented reality experience. So you have this bag, this tote bag, they sent me a ton of them. And there's a filter on Instagram that brings this to life when you hover it over the bag. So on one hand, it's like a nice tote bag, it looks pretty cool. On the other hand, it's like a really cool AR experience. So I love when people think that way. I love when people are just like the face filters are fun. I like the ones that make you look like you have makeup on because that's, great for me because I'm lazy. I like the ones that make you have cat ears because those are cute. But I think that there's a lot more you can do with those. And I think a lot of the time people just kind of stick to the safe stuff. So, definitely thinking beyond like, oh, a face filter where you look like a dog, to think like next level. And I think like Centro, all credit to them, did an amazing job thinking about, okay, how can we kind of extend what we've got with this design into something that was more immersive and cool.
So your major bet is that training is going to be one area where we'll see a lot of VR and AR moving forward. You mentioned that, there's a big opportunity for companies to upgrade their training material because we see better grades, more involvement.
Yeah.
But usually training comes under the HR overhead, and it's usually seen as a cost, a cost area, not a revenue area. So haven't you faced challenges, where you would have tried incorporating VR and AR in this field, and they're like, hey, the way it's going on in PDF and Excels or PPT is fine. We don't want to spend this much money just so that our employees can learn something with AR or VR.
Yeah, I have gotten that. And I think that's just something that, is kind of short-sighted, because here's where I sort of start spinning out the numbers, right? So, all the time that it takes employees to train is time that they are not working, right? There's a finite number of hours in the day. So if you are training using a method that is 70% faster, that means you then get a bunch more hours of work out of them where they are being productive, as opposed to you are paying for them to train, right? So there's a return on investment right there, right? If you so let's say it takes a week normally to train somebody to do a task. If you can cut that down by using VR to a day or 2 days, then you've saved a lot of money. You've saved 3 days worth of training costs. So things start to add up and add up and add up. So, what I will say to companies is this: if all of your training is fantastic, if your employees love it, if everyone is learning what they need to learn and you're not spending a ton of money on it, like, cool, I don't need to talk to you. You figured it out. Great. Like, best of luck. But that's not often the case, right? So I'll share a story that a friend of mine told me, and it's a great story, and I wish I could say who it was, but he swore me to secrecy. So he was running this group, and they had to do training that was like very rudimentary, very basic, and really boring. And it was like compliance training. No one wanted to do it. He had to like physically drag people to do this compliance training because it was boring. It was like you watch a video, and the video is about like safe hand washing, safe food preparation, like just so dull, and no one wanted to do it. So he was like, all right, let me try something. So he got a couple headsets, he found a developer, he built this VR experience and kind of gamified it around this, again, very boring skill set. He had people lining up outside his office, like coming back and knocking on his door and saying, I want to play the game again. I want to play the game again. Can I play the game again? Right? So he took this, again, kind of rudimentary task, and he went from like, oh, guys, I know you hate this. You really have to do it. The lawyers are making you, to people being like, okay, I did it before, but I want to do it again because it was so fun. Right? And then, of course, when he sort of tested people's skills after this, people had absorbed it much more quickly. So there's a lot of arguments to be made in terms of like, you're actually going to save money. You're going to get more out of your employees. People are going to learn faster. You're going to have fewer lawsuits. So if you're teaching people dangerous tasks, right? We built one of our very first pieces we ever consulted on was using VR to train people how to like climb telephone poles for a phone company. That's incredibly dangerous. Like, people can die if they don't know how to do that correctly. So if you can even just like improve safety by not sending untrained people out into the field where they can potentially be hurt, and that'll cost you a lot of money as a company, that right there is a huge win. So, people like do think short term about this stuff. It's really annoying to me. But, once you start kind of, laying out like what's the return on investment, it becomes apparent very quickly.
I mean, if we look back, so I think one of the first fields to adopt training in a virtual reality setting would be our Boeings and Airbuses, even the military, for how to fly an aircraft.
Yep.
And if they are doing it since years, so
Yeah.
there's a lot of merit in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like KLM, which is the Dutch airline, they're really far ahead. So they're great. I went to their offices in Amsterdam when I was there a couple of years ago and got to do a play date and put on the headset. And where they found really good cost savings is, normally, right, the pilots sort of train in a classroom, and then they have to actually train for a lot of stuff in the plane, right? So that means if pilots are training, the plane can't be used to ferry passengers. So they're paying for this, plane to be up in the air. They're paying for the fuel, which is very expensive, but they're not actually making money because they're just training the pilots to fly around in circles versus like moving passengers from point A to point B and back again. So what KLM did was they kept the classroom training, and then they added sort of an interim VR training.
Mm-hmm.
So pilots are much further ahead by the time because they do actually have to get in the cockpit at some point, but they are much further ahead. So what they found was it cut down the number of hours they had to be in flight by a lot. So it saved them money, and those planes could then be up in the air moving passengers around. So not only did they save money, it actually allowed them to make more money because the flights could be, flying from Rotterdam to London or whatever, right? Versus just being flown in a circle with a pilot and no passengers. So like, that's again, where people can kind of think about this stuff is not just like, oh, this is nice to have, or oh, it's cool, but really like this will result in sometimes really major cost savings.
Got it.
Great. When it comes down to Metaverse, do we have certain companies which are simply winning? Let's say maybe a Roblox or a Decentraland or a Sandbox, someone who's doing something differently and just hitting the ball out of the park?
Well, I mean, look, Roblox is up 25%. Like Roblox is doing well. I don't know that they are winning because I don't view these things as like a competition necessarily, but I think Roblox is doing great. I think Meta is really doing great in terms of hardware. I think Meta's workplace platforms are quite good. Horizon Workrooms is really, really good. I've used it a lot. It's a shame that more people aren't using it because it's pretty solid for what it is. Horizon Worlds is good. I think there's still some glitches that need to get worked out, and I think Meta has acknowledged as much, but I do like a lot about Horizon Worlds. I think what we're going to see is kind of a shakeout eventually. So, we're going to see a couple things. So first of all, like, some of these smaller companies will get absorbed by some larger companies. Some smaller companies just won't make it. Yeah. But like that's just kind of the nature of the beast. That's how it is. You're going to have platforms that have like different personalities, right? So I might use Horizon for sort of my professional personality, right? And I might use like Spatial for my after hours personality, my personality where I'm hanging out with friends, looking at art, watching a concert. So I think things will kind of shake out by that, right? Like most people have slightly different personas on different social platforms. So I think that's what's going to happen. And some of the worlds will make it and some won't, and some will be sort of niche communities and some will be more mainstream. But I think that's okay. Like that's kind of what we have today in terms of social media. And I think that has still worked well for everyone. So again, we're still in like very much in build mode. And I think that's what's really exciting about it. Like we don't know who's going to sort of be bigger or smaller in the end. I will say this for Meta though. People are sort of like doubting Meta, and they are a client of mine. So I am somewhat biased, but I'll also say this, like, and this is just a fact, social networking before Facebook and after Facebook were vastly different. Okay, so I'm old enough to remember like Friendster, which RIP Friendster, but I remember MySpace, and MySpace at its heyday was 75 million monthly active users, right? And it was mostly young people, very sort of homogenous group, right? Facebook is 2 billion monthly active users. That's a third of the planet. That's everyone. So Facebook took social networking from what was kind of like a niche thing for young people to a global phenomenon where everyone is on the platform. And they know how to do this, right? This is a skill set that they have, and they've done it before. There's no real reason to think they can't do it again. And I think people who dismiss them are doing that too quickly without historical context.
I love this point that you made. Even I used to think that, hey, Metaverse is usually your Gen Z, people who are aged between 15 to 20 years old, really participating in this. But when you brought in the analogy that, hey, earlier when there was a MySpace or some company, I don't know, forgot the name.
Hi-Fi Orkut.
Hi-Fi Orkut, they were just youngsters, using it. And suddenly I see my parents using Facebook and Instagram, and I'm like, oh God, I'll have to post very sensitively. But yeah.
Or you can restrict them.
Yeah, no, I use Facebook to keep in touch with my great aunt who's 80. It is everyone. And oh my God, Orchid, that was like a Brazilian platform. I haven't thought of that in ages. They got bought by AOL, I think, or Bebo. Anyway, but like, yeah, there were all these companies that were kind of building, and they were all very young. And I think that's the other key point you mentioned is right now the metaverse is very Gen Z, but Gen Z is going to grow up. Yeah. So that's why we're seeing a lot of this stuff in universities and educational institutions, because they're starting to realize like, oh, this is what kids are used to. Asking them to sit in a classroom all day is not aligning with their experience. And those kids in a few years will be in the workforce. And I guarantee if you have a Gen Z audience that is used to the metaverse and you're like, watch this video, they're going to be like, no, like, no, not happening. So I think this is one of those things that will, like social networking, like other things, it'll trickle up. And that's where it's going to get really interesting.
Yeah. What are the top, and this is the last question because we are short time. If somebody wants to build in the metaverse or the VR space as entrepreneurs and builders, what are some of the best use cases that somebody can target? And not a get rich scheme, but something which, for sure, thought this is needed. If you build this, you might make money.
Oh boy, I wish I had the answer to that. I think again, like building, so Spatial's a great platform and I like them a lot. They're very much sort of like the Squarespace of the metaverse where you can customize worlds with templates. They have a Unity integration if you're more technical. So I love Spatial, but I certainly think there's room for other platforms that are similar. I think that if you want to build kind of communities, then you need to think about how do you monetize those communities? How do you do events? How do you create incentives for people to be part of it? I'm not sure that I'm bought in on the idea of like buying virtual handbags right now. I think that's super niche. Maybe in a couple of years, maybe not. But yeah, I definitely think like, you know, building worlds that are sort of exciting for people to be in and easy for people to create with, I think are always wins. And I think if you're in the VR space, you know, there are certain verticals that do really well, like training is growing, fitness is growing, gaming obviously is growing. Now gaming is hard because like the barrier to entry is very, very high because it costs so much. But certainly thinking about like, what are the options in education? That's going to be a huge vertical going forward. So, you know, thinking about how do you create there and then just kind of doing that. But yeah, it's a wide open space. And if I had the get rich quick answer, I would not be talking to you. I'd be on a beach. So take what you will.
Hope we meet on a beach in a metaverse somewhere.
Yes, on a beach on the metaverse.
No, I would still prefer the real beach instead of a beach and metaverse.
I've
But
been
yeah,
to a
let's
lot of beaches last year, so I'm done with beaches. So Cortney, I understand you have a class to teach. So thank you so much for
Thank
spending
you.
thank you
time
so
with
much.
us. Amazing session. And hopefully we'll see you again in a second season. So thank you so much. And all the
Absolutely.
best. Yeah.
Thank you. And folks can feel free to find me on, you just search my name. It's Cortney, Cortney Harding. Hit me up on socials. I'm around. And yeah, thanks, guys. Great chatting with you.
Bye.